There are people who go quiet in ways that are easy to misread. They don't slam doors. They don't send long emotional messages explaining how much they're hurting. They don't post anything cryptic online, hoping someone will notice the subtext. They simply stop. The phone goes face down. Messages accumulate, read or unread, it doesn't matter. And from the outside, it looks like coldness, or distance, or maybe they're just busy. But it's none of those things. Not withdrawal, not indifference, not a quiet act of punishment toward the people trying to reach them. It's something far more interior than that. It's the only response their system knows how to produce when everything inside has exceeded its capacity, and the cost of pretending otherwise has become too high to pay. And here is the part that almost never gets named: the experience that lives in the silence between a received message and a response that never comes. These people don't go quiet because they're strong enough to handle everything alone. They go quiet because being seen while they're falling apart feels more dangerous than falling apart in private. Somewhere along the way, they learned that the world doesn't always hold broken things gently, and they never forgot that lesson. There is a specific kind of person this happens to. They are not in general people who avoid others. Quite the opposite. They tend to show up fully for the people they love. They remember the details. They sit with friends in difficult moments without needing anything in return. They are the ones who answer immediately when someone else is struggling, who listen for hours without checking the time, who carry the weight of other people's lives with a steadiness that looks, from the outside, almost effortless. But when the weight inside them becomes too heavy, when something in their own life cracks or collapses, or simply wears them down to the bone, something fundamental shifts. The usual impulse to reach out, to say, "I'm not doing well," or "I need someone right now," simply doesn't come. Or it comes quietly and then retreats before it can be acted on, because opening up requires energy, and they have none left. Because honesty about pain requires a kind of vulnerability that, when they're already depleted, feels like standing outside in winter without a coat. Technically possible, but at a cost they cannot afford right now. Because some part of them knows, from experience, that expressing need doesn't always end in comfort. Sometimes it ends in advice they didn't ask for. Sometimes it ends in the other person making their pain about themselves. Sometimes it ends in having to manage the emotional reaction of the person they reached out to. And that labor, right now, is simply beyond them. So they go quiet. Not forever. Not as a decision. Not as a message. They go quiet because silence, for them, is the closest thing to rest that still exists. Psychologists have a name for the tendency to hide personal distress from others. They call it self-concealment, and research around it reveals something worth sitting with. Self-concealment isn't the same as being private. It isn't stoicism. It isn't emotional strength in the way that phrase is usually meant. It's a coping pattern, one that develops when a person has learned, through repeated experience, that sharing pain doesn't reliably lead to relief. That sometimes being honest about what you're going through creates more to manage, not less. People who self-conceal tend to carry higher levels of internal anxiety, precisely because the emotion has nowhere to go. It doesn't disappear, it circulates, it deepens in private. But releasing it into the social world has come to feel more costly than containing it, so containment becomes the default. Not a choice exactly, more like a reflex that was built over time, one careful silence at a time. For sensitive and deeply introspective people, this pattern has an additional layer. They feel things at a higher amplitude than most. A harsh word lands differently. A disappointment lingers in a way that others seem to move past effortlessly. A sense of overwhelm spreads faster and reaches further. And when everything inside is already amplified, the idea of adding external complexity, of being misunderstood or dismissed or responded to with cheerful advice that completely misses the point, becomes genuinely unbearable. Carl Jung wrote that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And for people who go quiet when they're not okay, there is often a version of this terror at work. Not just the terror of being seen, but the terror of being seen and found to be too much, too sensitive, too heavy, too complicated to be worth the effort. So they protect themselves the only way that feels safe in that moment. They disappear inward. They wait. They survive in private, hoping that by the time they resurface, they'll have processed enough to be presentable again, to be the version of themselves that others are comfortable receiving. If this is the kind of conversation you've been quietly looking for, the kind that doesn't ask you to explain yourself or perform okayness, this channel exists for exactly that. A still place on the internet where these questions are taken seriously and where you are never too much. You're welcome here. I remember sitting at a dinner table once, a small gathering, people I genuinely cared about, conversation moving easily around the room, and feeling something I couldn't name at the time. Not boredom, not discomfort exactly. Something closer to a slow, internal dimming, like a light being turned down by degrees, so gradually that no one else in the room could see it happening. Everyone around me was present in a way I simply wasn't, laughing at the right moments, engaged, curious, warm. And the gap between where they were and where I had gone felt vast and completely invisible to everyone but me. I remember excusing myself at some point, standing in a hallway for a few minutes, and thinking, I cannot explain what is happening inside me right now. And more than that, I don't want to try. Not because the people at that table weren't safe, but because the attempt itself felt like it would cost me the last of something I desperately needed to keep for myself. That night, I understood something I hadn't had words for before. That going quiet isn't always avoidance. Sometimes it's the most honest thing a person can do. It's saying, without saying anything at all, I am somewhere you can't follow right now, and I need that to be okay. This wasn't a failure of connection. It was information about where I was, what I needed, and what my system was, quietly, urgently trying to protect. Here's what most people will never understand about you when you go silent. They will assume you are pulling away from them, that the distance is about them, that your silence is a form of rejection, or worse, a quiet accusation. Something they did, something they said, something that made you decide they weren't worth the reply. But the silence was never about them. Not really. What they're reading as withdrawal is actually something closer to conservation. You are preserving what little remains of yourself so that there is something left when this passes. You are not shutting the world out because you don't love it. You are protecting the part of you that still can. Jung understood this instinct deeply. He wrote that the introvert's movement inward is not a retreat from life, but a return to the source of it. The inner world, for certain people, is not an escape. It is where meaning is made, where experience is processed, where the self is restored after contact with everything outside it has worn it thin. Your silence, in this light, is not emptiness. It is the sound of someone doing the invisible, essential work of putting themselves back together, carefully, quietly, without an audience. But here's the part almost no one explains. Because for many people who go quiet this way, the pattern didn't begin in adulthood. It began much earlier, in rooms where expressing pain led to outcomes that made the pain worse. In families where emotions were too much, or not enough, or simply not welcome at the table. In friendships where vulnerability was met with distance, or worse, with ridicule. In moments where asking for help felt more frightening than continuing to suffer quietly. Psychologists who study attachment patterns note that people who develop what's called an avoidance style, a tendency to self-soothe rather than seek comfort from others, often do so not because they are cold or incapable of closeness. They do so because closeness once came with unpredictable costs. They learned to need less, visibly, to become self-sufficient in their emotional lives in ways that looked to the outside world like independence, sometimes even like admirable strength. And here, Seneca offers something precise and quietly radical. He wrote, The mind should be brought back from external objects to itself. Let it trust in itself, rejoice in itself. Let it admire its own things. For someone who learned early that the external world was an unpredictable place to bring their pain, this inward turning wasn't weakness or avoidance. It was, in its own way, a form of wisdom. The discovery that the self can be a refuge when the world outside does not know how to hold you. What others perceive as you shutting down is often you returning to the one place that has always been reliable, your own interior. This is not a flaw in your design. It is the design working as it was built, shaped by experience, refined by necessity, oriented always towards survival, and, eventually, towards something quieter than survival. Peace. But let's make some distinctions, because not all silence is the same, and you deserve to be clear about the difference. There is the silence that restores, the quiet you enter because you know from long experience that solitude is where you find yourself again, where the noise settles, where you can finally hear what you actually think and feel beneath all the performance of the day. That silence is healthy. It is chosen. It is purposeful, even when it looks like nothing from the outside. And then there is the silence that isolates, the disappearing that goes on too long. That becomes its own kind of enclosure. That slowly cuts you off not just from people, but from yourself, from your own feelings, your own needs, your own sense of what you want from this life. One is a form of self-knowledge. The other is what happens when self-protection becomes the only story you know how to tell. Going quiet when you're not okay can be wise. It can be necessary. It can be the kindest thing you do for yourself in a moment of genuine overwhelm. But if the silence stretches past the point of restoration, if weeks pass and the weight doesn't lift, if you find yourself not resting in the quiet, but slowly vanishing into it, that is worth paying attention to. Not with judgment, not with the harsh internal voice that already knows how to make you feel like you're failing. With the same gentleness you would offer someone you love who told you they'd been struggling alone for far too long. The question was never whether you should be allowed to go quiet. You should. You always should. The question worth sitting with is this: is the silence currently serving you, or has it, without your full awareness, become the thing you most need to find your way out of? For years, going quiet during hard times felt like evidence of something broken, like an inability to do what seemed to come naturally to everyone else. To reach out, to say, "I'm not okay," to let themselves be held in the way they were always willing to hold others. The attempts were real. The reaching out happened sometimes, carefully, tentatively, with a great deal of quiet courage that no one ever saw. And the results were mixed enough that the attempts became less frequent over time. There was a slow, accumulating exhaustion in the trying, in the explaining, in the translating of an interior experience into language that other people could receive without being overwhelmed or confused or dismissive. Months passed, sometimes longer, trying to talk it away, trying to be different, trying to need connection in simpler, more manageable ways. And then, somewhere in the middle of all that effort, something shifted. A different understanding arrived. Not loudly, but the way most true things arrive, quietly and all at once. Going quiet when you're not okay is not a sign that you're incapable of connection. It's a sign that you take it seriously enough to protect it from moments when you have nothing left to give, including nothing left to give yourself. The silence was never a wall. It was a waiting room, and the person sitting in it was not giving up. They were gathering themselves, carefully, at their own pace, in the only way that had ever actually worked. So if you are someone who stops answering when you're not okay, here is what living with this more gently might begin to look like. It might mean telling one person, just one, something small and true, not an explanation, not a performance of vulnerability, just a quiet signal. I'm going through something. I'm okay, but I'm not fully here right now. That's enough. That's more than enough. It might mean setting a private, internal limit on the silence, not as a rule imposed from the outside, but as a form of self-care, chosen from within, allowing yourself the quiet you need, while also knowing the approximate shape of when you'll begin reaching back toward the world. It might mean noticing the difference between the silence that feels like relief and the silence that feels like disappearing. One leaves you more yourself at the end of it. The other leaves you less. You already know the difference. You've always known. It might mean releasing the expectation that you should be able to explain what's happening while it's still happening. Processing first, sharing later is a completely valid order of operations. It doesn't make you closed off. It makes you someone who needs to understand their own experience before trying to translate it for someone else. It might mean being a little less harsh with yourself about the messages that went unanswered. You were not neglecting the people who sent them. You were keeping yourself from drowning. Those are not the same thing. They have never been the same thing. Imagine a version of your life in which none of this requires justification, where the people closest to you understand, genuinely understand, that your silence is not a statement about them, that when you go quiet, you will return, that you are not retreating from the relationship, you are tending to the person inside it, where you have learned to honor your own rhythms without guilt, to move inward when you need to, and outward when you're ready, without apologizing for the shape of either, where your capacity for deep feeling, the same capacity that makes the overwhelm so intense, so consuming, is recognized for what it also produces, an ability to be present with others in ways that are genuinely rare, a quality of attention and care that most people will go their whole lives without receiving from anyone. You don't have to become someone who reaches out easily in moments of pain. You don't have to rewire the parts of you that learned long ago to survive quietly and restore themselves in private. But you might, slowly, gently, without forcing anything, begin to trust that the silence you need doesn't have to be kept secret, that there are people who can hold the knowledge of it without needing you to explain it away, or dress it up, or make it more comfortable for them to receive. That being alone when you're not okay is not the same as being abandoned, not when you understand what the aloneness is for, not when you've learned, truly learned, to be the one who stays with yourself. But here's the question that arrives quietly at the edge of all of this. What happens when the silence has gone on long enough that you're no longer sure how to come back? When the patterns of self-concealment have become so practiced, so automatic, that even you have lost track of what you're actually feeling underneath them? When the waiting room has been quiet for so long that you've forgotten a little what you were waiting for? That's a different kind of navigation, one that asks something different of you than simply honoring your need for quiet. It's the question of how a person who has learned to disappear begins, slowly and without force, to reappear, to themselves first, and then, carefully, to the world. That question lives in the next conversation. Alone together. A quiet corner of the internet for people who choose solitude over half-hearted connections.